Welcome back to the Drop Culture Podcast, everybody. My name is Brock, and sitting across from me, I have Dan.
Hello.
And we do have a special guest today. His name is Austin Trunick, and he is the author of a new set of books that is all about the Cannon films. Dan, you got the title for it, or?
Didn't know I was supposed to.
Oh, shit. I was throwing it to you.
That's okay. Actually, I'll turn it over to Austin. Tell us a little bit, just a real quick name of your book. I did read a good portion of it, and then I finished it up last night, but I'll be honest. I know it is the Cannon Field Guide, correct?
The Cannon Film Guide, that's correct.
Film Guide,
Volume
yes.
1 is what's out now. That covers the first 5 years, 1980 to 1984. And that starts really right after Golan and Globus took over the company and started making their version of Hollywood movies. That's usually the period that we associate with, most fans associate as being canon. You know?
Absolutely.
Right. The logo and everything like that. I'll just read a little bit of the intro for this. Okay. From 1980 until 1994, the Cannon Group was responsible for the production of more than 200 films. Quantity rather than quality was the key to Cannon's game. Their output included many of the 1980s most beloved and notorious B-movies. Along the way, they dipped their toes into every imaginable genre of movies, made stars out of Chuck Norris and Michael Dudikoff, kicked off the ninja and breakdancing crazes, and kept Charles Bronson working into the twilight of his career. While it's rare to find a traditionally good film bearing the company's famous logo, it's even harder to find one that isn't immensely entertaining from its title screen to the credit roll. So, I mean...
I like that.
Yeah. That really kind of says it all about Cannon. I mean, Cannon was just tremendous in the 80s. And even if you don't realize you watched a lot of Cannon films, you did.
You did. In the 80s and 90s, absolutely.
You lived it. I mean, those were the videos that you would see in the movie at the movie video stores and just be like, oh my God, I'm going to rent that.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of them didn't come to like my hometown. There's a lot of movies that I didn't get to see.
Sure.
On the screen. It was mainly the bigger production companies, but these guys were the biggest to me almost, you know?
They were definitely a big part of my life, being a huge fan of B films in the first place from a youth. And obviously I've read your book, Austin, but can you tell us a little bit about what your motivations were to get into Cannon?
Well, I think my association with Cannon began how a lot of Cannon fans, I think we share an origin story, and that's linked back to the video store, really, where everywhere you looked, the Cannon logo was somewhere on the shelf, whether you were in action, science fiction, horror, musicals. They did a little bit of everything. And I was too young to have seen a lot of them in theaters, but of course, video shop was where we went every weekend and rented our weekend's entertainment. You spent 10 minutes there, came out with a stack of movies. And that was a lot of Cannon movies. And later on, when I got a little older, about middle school, you could rent them yourself, and the clerks really didn't care whether it was R-rated and you were 12 years old.
Sure.
They'd rent it to you. So bringing home Enter the Ninja, New Year's Evil, watching them in my buddy's basement, and that was what we did after school most weeknights for a good couple years.
Yeah, most of the time, renting from any video store, sometimes you would have like a full week with a movie, especially during the summer. That was one of the things, being a latchkey kid. My mom would take me on a certain day, or my dad would, and I would pick 5, 6 movies, right? And I'd have all week to just always watch them over and over again. And it was just one of those things that they stuck because that's what you had, the commitment of watching those movies over and over again, because you didn't get to keep them.
Right.
You know, it wasn't very prevalent to have, you know, a big VHS collection unless somebody recorded all your movies, you know, from Skinamax and everything like that, you know.
Sure.
And with something like the video store really being cover driven, and these guys were very cover driven too, as far as like artwork goes. So it really did. A lot of their artwork would grab you from the shelf, and you'd be like, "All right, I'm gonna pick that one," you know, just because it looks cool. And it might have been the shittiest movie you ever saw, but it was still fucking cool.
Well, I think it kind of goes back to what Bobby said from the Not For Everyone podcast when he was on our show. You know, you made a commitment when you rented those movies. You didn't have an option. It's not like streaming. I can just turn it off 15 minutes in and go. This is my entertainment. I'm going to watch this movie. So
I dug my grave.
Exactly.
That's a lot of the commitment to those movies, where it made you committed to not necessarily franchises a lot, but you were, you know, in a way, you were committed to like the Death Wish franchise. Anytime a new one came out, you're like, I'm there. You know, anytime you saw anything that was just like, just a little bit different, but still in the same vein, you're like, I'm going to get that one. It's the same way with a lot of trauma films and things like that. I mean, you saw them and you went for it, but Cannon had this polish, I think. Personally, I like the way that the directors, and they would pretty much choose whatever. And they would just, the feeling of these movies were always so cool, you know. It looked gritty, it looked dirty, but it was 80s gritty, 80s dirty, you know.
I'll share just real quick my really standout memory of Cannon. I was young, Ninja craze was going on, and I remember I had a birthday party and a bunch of my friends came over and we were camping out in the backyard. But before that, we rented every Cannon Ninja movie. And I mean, we just watched them all, and then we were fighting in the backyard. It was awesome. So that's a big memory for me. That was really like what ingrained Cannon in my mind at a young age.
Yeah, that ninja craze was like, everybody wanted to be a goddamn ninja or commando.
Somehow I became a ninja like sensei on my block, and people would have fights in my backyard, and I'd have to ref them. I don't know what happened. Nobody got seriously injured, so hey, we're happy for that.
Well, it was so close to the end of Vietnam, too, and then you had all the missing in action movies, and you had all of these other kind of Vietnam veteran kind of going back and taking everything down, and they're all war crazed.
Sure.
But yet, I mean, it was like you would watch them and you'd be like, "Yeah, I'm gonna go buy a knife. I'm gonna go get some gun toys before they take them away from me." And like you said, though, that's one of the things that I really feel that was really cool is so many people at the video stores, movie theaters, and things like that letting you into these movies or letting you rent these movies. So it was like, I mean, it was people like us, you know, that were like, "Hey, I don't care if you're 12.
Right.
I'll let you get this bullshit." That's
maybe
cool.
Not the best decision to make as a clerk from an employee for one of those places.
But see, and I did that one time, and I got in big trouble. I sold a copy of Texas Chainsaw Massacre to a 9-year-old one time.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, and I was just like, because it was me. I was used to these type of movies, and I was used to all of that shit. And I was like, "Hey, here you go, buddy." And then his mom called, and that wasn't cool.
I bet not.
Oh, no.
But never did it again, you know.
So is this your first book, Austin?
This is my first book.
Okay.
I have been writing for magazines and online for a decade, but this is my first published book.
Nice. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed this, and I really want to, if it's okay, if we can kind of start digging in, I just want to know a little bit about your process. You had access to, some great interviews in there.
Thank you.
How did you start that process of like, were you just randomly reaching out to, to these people?
Yeah, it's a lot of random reaching out, finding out where these people are now. Ones who are still working in the industry, it's easier because you can find representatives or agents, but there are a lot of people who have gone on to become teachers or sculptors or all sorts of different careers, and at that point you're hunting through Facebook, you're looking through the white pages, trying to find where people are, and in some cases, it was once I found a lead, just write a snail mail letter.
You got to put your detective hat on, right? And really dig down. That's awesome.
Yeah. So it's been, some of it was tough. Some of them people were very tough. There are some people I would have loved to have spoken to, but just couldn't find.
Sure.
But what's been nice as I'm finishing up the second book now is there have been much better reception to find people saying yes and being eager to talk to me because I can point towards the first volume.
Absolutely.
And they can see that I'm not just a crazy fan, which I totally am. That's fair. They're right to assume that, but there's this interview is going to be for a purpose.
Sure. That's great, man.
No, it's really cool to be able to talk to some of these people. I think just especially in this first one. I mean, the one that I'm kind of like swooning over almost is the Catherine Mary Stewart that you got to talk to. She seems like she's so cool, but she's been in so many of those movies that I liked back in the day. And being in like The Apple, which is like, what the hell is this movie? But she was in so many cool ones, and we even covered one of her movies, Night of the Comet. Just because that's just one of those. I love that movie, and she's such a great actress, and to be able to talk with anybody that's associated with this stuff must have been just like you would have been above the moon. I know I would have. I would have just been like, oh my God.
Yeah, first and foremost, I am like a super fan of these movies. So anytime somebody would agree to talk to me, jump on the phone or jump on Skype, it's been wonderful. And just hearing first person the stories from them has been great.
Well, and I think it's important too because you're really digging into a specific vein where we may have lost some of those stories had you not compiled them. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Austin.
Thank you. The second volume, I had a long 2-hour interview with James Karen, who was in Return of the Living Dead, is probably his best known B movie from the 80s. And he was in Invaders from Mars. And I did this interview about 4 years ago, but he passed away within months after that. He was in his 90s, and it's probably his last interview, but I'm glad I got to talk to him for so long. And some of these guys that are up there, they're not going to be around in 5-10 years, like you said.
Absolutely. So, and that's kind of the theme of our podcast, which was so cool that you reached out because that's a lot of the drop culture. The reason we call it drop culture, these are things that maybe a decade from now, people aren't going to talk about if we don't pass it down.
Absolutely.
So again, I appreciate all your hard work with that because that capsulizes something for everyone.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, keeping that stuff alive, the oral history of especially cinema from our generation is one of those things that I've seen a lot here lately, and it was just really cool to see that email from you that somebody else kind of really liked canon as much as we did and I did, and it was like, oh my God, this is like super cool. I mean, I know both me and Dan were like, this will be really cool because we had done so many different things with canon, and then I've noticed joining different groups on like social media, things like that there's so many people that is out there, and you having this oral history and this imprint is going to be something that people look back at and is like, oh, this is going to be really cool, to kind of keep that lineage going and maybe inspire other people to go ahead and just take the reins. We need more people like that,
I really hope so. This is an era of film that I think just because so much was put out in the video area, straight to video and on strange labels and in different distribution patterns, that we're in danger of losing some of these movies. I would not be surprised if there's just a handful of tape copies of some great exploitation films out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's always interesting to go through like the thrift stores, like you said, like here in the Springs, and I know everywhere around here, we just got tons of thrift stores, and VHS seems to be like one of the coolest things that I like to look for every time I go, every single time. And sometimes you see something and you're like, maybe I should get that one. And then you find out they didn't really make a lot of those, and a lot of those didn't come out. Like in the mid 90s to the late 90s, they were selling VHS for so cheap at like Walmart and all the different places like that you could buy newer movies, but you couldn't find the old ones. But then they started doing all of the DVD, the re-releases, and things like that. And now you have people like Shout and all the other companies that are actually putting together these really good compilation movies and remastering and kind of bringing them back to the forefront, which I think that is garnering a lot of interest when it comes to it, which is really cool because there's gonna be a lot of VHS that people are gonna hold really dear and kind of covet because they can't find anymore. And like we were talking earlier, basically about the VHS players not working. It's like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to keep this stuff? There's some heroes out there on YouTube that are putting that stuff up there, which is pretty cool. And like, how are they getting a hold of this stuff? But that's another avenue for a lot of this stuff is people are actually posting that stuff on the internet, so it's never going to go anywhere.
100%. And I'll say, reading through your book, really, as big of a fan as I was of the films, I personally, I know Brock was not this way, but I didn't know a lot of the history of Cannon films. And I'm going to be remiss, so I'm going to let you if you can just give us kind of an overview of what you talked about in that, because I know that if I do it, I'm going to ruin the names.
Sure.
But that was really expansive for me, and I got to from that kind of research a little bit on my own too, which was exciting. So.
Yeah, so Cannon began as an American company, and they released a few small independent productions in the late 60s, but they mostly made their name and their money by taking a lot of Northern European pornographic films and dubbing them and releasing them for that theatrical chain. And meanwhile, over in Israel, you have Menachem Golan and Yoram Globus, who were two cousins who were filmmakers. One was a director and producer. The other one was more your money man. And they were very successful at home. They made some very popular movies in Hebrew, some musicals, some action films. They came to the U.S. to make some, Britain to make some. But these did well around, of course, in Israel and in some strange places you wouldn't imagine, like Japan and Germany. But they never broke in the U.S. The U.S. was the one place that they could never get into the market and get the attention. So finally, they decided that the best way to get into Hollywood is to buy an American company and sort of use those resources in that catalog to distribute their own product. So Cannon was in financial trouble then, the old Cannon, and Menachem Golan, Yoram Globus came in, and they didn't have the money to buy it. But so the thing they did is they made a deal with the owners to sell their back catalog, all of their old exploitation movies that they had between their own stuff and the international stuff that they own the rights to in the U.S., to sell them all over the rest of the world. And Cannon was very good at that, selling video rights, theatrical rights. And by doing that, basically liquidating the old Cannon's assets, they were able to buy Cannon. And that happened in 1979. They started putting out their first movies under their own stamp in 1980. And that's where we begin with the Cannon that we know.
Yeah, like you said, I know that they were, or at least Menahem. I'm going to say it incorrect every time, but until I stop to think about it. But they literally he was the best filmmaker in Israel, wasn't he, at the time?
Yeah.
He was really touted as being, just the best of the best at that point. And didn't they have a release to where there's only 2.3 million people there, but 1.3 million saw that movie? It was something amazingly just crazy as much as people loved it. So they had that built-in audience there. So you make it big in your home, your backyard, and then all of a sudden, because he always wanted to go to Hollywood, didn't he? Mm-hmm. I mean, he always watched the movies. He was always looking at everything and anything that he could, and he was a doer. And which is, you see the people that take the most chances in anything, they just do it. And not really having a lot of money and moving all the way over here just to break into it. He did it first, right? He was over here first, and then didn't Yoram come in? And they were both really great salesmen. They could sell whatever. They sold pictures, pretty much, and they would
anything to anyone.
Yeah, no, and it's cool to see that because they got the excitement, and I think Menahem really had the excitement to really get everybody around him excited about doing whatever it was, you know, which is really cool. And, you know, I mean, very few people could do that. And I think that's another one of the big things about what they did.
Well, I think that's why you had to have Urim, right? He was the balance.
Right.
Otherwise, you know, he would have just been everywhere. He would have never had resources to do the things that he did, I think, without Urim.
Yeah, they were definitely a two-headed giant there. With Menachem, really, he handled the creative stuff. He was the one who sort of put together the slate and put together ideas. And Yoram was the guy who took these, you know, mocked-up movie posters or sketches or titles to foreign markets and sold them. And when enough people bought an idea, they could take those contracts back to the U.S., get loans based on those promised sales, and actually make these movies. And that's why they were able to keep going for so long, making these movies that really cost nothing, but made nothing at the box office here in the U.S. either.
Sure.
It does kind of remind me of some of the older movie studios back in the day, because there's so many, and we're talking like in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, you know, where they were selling just the poster, and then they would sell out across the country for their road shows or whatnot. But
Right.
yeah, they'd have like the Ed Wood movies that they would have to make, you know, on $50 and a pack of bubble gum, you know, just
Right.
to get it going, you know, and they were selling them everywhere, and they might not have been the best, but people were doing what they loved. And that was the cool part about it. And he just loved film so much. I know that during most of the time, if he wasn't doing anything production related or business related, he was going to watch movies. You know,
Right.
I mean, he was there in the movie theater, just like anybody that had the capability to do that would be there, which is awesome, you know. And in the 80s, shit, how many movie chains? Now it's all like big conglomerate style,
Yeah,
you
got
know,
like 4 majors, I think. Or
Yeah.
3 majors.
and now it's like it's hard to kind of see those even small films. Even growing up too, very seldomly did you get to see a really good movie in the theater that wasn't like advertised on TV, advertised everywhere, you know, and it was an Indiana Jones type of a situation, you know. But then when something like Cobra or Over the Top or Sylvester Stallone, you know, one of the biggest stars of the whole entire 80s, you know, one of my favorites too, coming out with some movie, and you're like, wow, this is pretty nuts seeing something like this. This is badass. And then you actually get to go to the theater for those, you know.
Yeah.
You saw those. It was just the way that they just pushed, and it didn't matter.
Yeah, Canon was they were always walking the line from almost being broke the whole time they were in operation. That a lot of times they couldn't afford to make prints to send all over the country. They still did the staggered model where they would print enough for 3 or 4 cities, and then when those were done playing for a week or two, they'd pack them up in a box and they would go to the next, to work their way from the West Coast to the East or vice versa. And yeah, and sometimes if the movie wasn't doing well, it would just stop in Chicago, or the prints wouldn't make it past Kansas City or something like that. But yeah, that's a lot of their movies were hard to see until they hit the video shelf, which
Home video obviously revolutionized everything for American movie viewing. I would say worldwide, but I only experienced the American side of that, so I don't know how quickly that happened everywhere else. I kind of there are some parts. Obviously, I don't want to give away too much because I want people to buy your book. But I do have a question. So I want to kind of stay within this book. What was your favorite interview from this first book?
my favorite interview, I'm very fond of getting to talk to Sam Furstenberg. He directed Revenge of the Ninja, Ninja 3, Breakin' 2, Electric Boogaloo, and then the first 2 American Ninja movies, which will be in the second volume. But we had a very long, afternoon-long conversation, and he's one of the nicest guys I've ever spoken with who's worked in the B-movie business. But he was also one of the first people who agreed to speak to me about this. And so really when the project was not coming together, getting to talk to somebody who directed Revenge of the Ninja or Ninja 3 and hear his stories directly was fantastic to keep me going, really, because it made it feel legitimate to me that this could happen. And yeah, getting his stories were were awesome because these movies, as wild as they are on screen, they were just as crazy behind the scenes.
And that is something you mentioned in the book too, that some of the lore that we hear is not necessarily correct, but the real life stuff that happened was as crazy, if not crazier. So you shedding a lot of light on that was pretty interesting to me. So just awesome.
Yeah, no, go for it.
There are definitely stories that, even if they're not in this volume, 'cause when I started writing it, I was really writing out of order. So there are interviews I did 4 years ago that aren't in here. They're in a volume that'll come out 2 or 3 years down the road.
Sure.
But one of the most famous ones, and it's actually a story that Roger Ebert had recounted a bunch of times. But when Barbette Schroeder went to make Barfly, the story was that he had gone into the Canon offices and they had pulled the money or something at that point, and he had threatened. He went in with an electric saw that he would saw off his finger if Malcolm Golan did not let him make the movie.
Every single day or something, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was something like he would cut off one finger per day for that.
Yeah, and of course the story that went on was that it's horrifying that Malcolm Golan could not say no to that point. And yeah, when I talked to Barbette Schroeder, I was a little disappointed to hear that story was greatly exaggerated. It was a threat he had made once, and he wasn't actually in there with the saw as the story goes. But then again, you get stories like that aren't as crazy as the story that gets repeated all the time is. But then you get ones that are much weirder.
Yeah, it's very hard to kind of put down. You're like, I can't believe that happened.
And from some of the interviews in there, I really get the feeling. Have you ever seen the movie Get Shorty?
It's been a long time, but
I really feel like working with those guys was a little like that, like a little like working with I don't remember who said it in one of your interviews. Actually, was like a little bit like working with gangsters. Yeah, because you're always trying to make sure you got that money coming in to keep things going. Just cool stuff. Awesome.
Yeah. No, I'm just looking at your first volume here, and just looking at all these different movies. There were so many things that came out and it wasn't like they didn't stick to a specific genre, which was awesome. I really love the fact that Menahem was really trying to break new ground with new things. He'd always figured that there would be like, oh, this is the next best thing, or he would hear a conversation and be like, oh my God, they're talking about this. We need to make a movie about it. And they had to rush to get those movies out, which was, I mean, come on, that was pretty awesome. They're sitting like, well, there's breakdancing going on. Guess what? I already got an idea for a movie. But in the fact that he was such a creative and just an awesome force around everybody, that he could come up with a movie right in front of you, and just be like, okay, here's a story. It's a movie about a dog, and then they are gonna meet a gorilla somewhere, and they're ninjas, and you're like, holy shit, how is that gonna fucking work? and it does on some level, in some weird level, and then it's like, oh my God, and that might be somebody's absolute favorite movie of all time. It's like, how did that get there? Which was really awesome. I mean, having like Bo Derek, one of the major sex symbols of the late 70s, 80s, almost into the 90s too, coming in and making this just weird, kind of sex movie.
I think that, and again, I'll build off that, but I think it wasn't, there's so many people that were involved. A lot of them, like you said, and like Charles Bronson in the latter part, but Adam West, people like that, like, wow. He really pulled talent. I mean, it wasn't necessarily at the height of their power, I guess, but
right.
But which lends some gravity though to the films that he's making, regardless of sometimes those are a little on the cuff, I guess, or a little fantastical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I think the 80s being dominated by the Brat Pack and different things like that, and they were highly polished movies. Like, they looked like they had gone through the squeaky clean machine, but yet they were dark. You would have, like, Less Than Zero that was based on the book, and it was just really like, oh, drugs and weird stuff. And then you have these that are, like, Hospital Massacre, You have even Death Wish going, and we were talking about this earlier too, kind of off mic, how they took a franchise that wasn't even a franchise and made a franchise out of it. You know, that's a weird way to kind of put it. I mean, they took Charles Bronson, which was a complete badass. The dude was an awesome dude. Makes Death Wish, right? And then they bring it back to do 2 through 4 or 5. And it's like, how many movies was this guy going to do?
Well, that second one was a decade later. Am I correct on that?
Yeah. It had been a long time. I think, yes, 82 was the...
Okay.
Yeah, it had been almost a decade.
Yeah. That's so nuts that they would bring somebody like that back. And Charles Bronson was a staple, you know, in the late 60s and early 70s and even before that, too. I mean, all of his Westerns were always really cool.
I knew he did a lot of Westerns. Yeah.
Magnificent Seven, he was like one of the best characters on that movie. But just his whole overall, like, presence, being in a movie like those, you're like, damn, this guy's still pissed off? Like you said, it's like he's pissed off for 5 fucking movies, you know? Like, he can't stop being pissed off at what's going on out there in the world.
And then you think about that, we kind of keep recreating that kind of thing. I mean, look at like the Taken movies.
Right.
You know?
Right.
It's that hero's journey, you know?
You have to stop and think, how many times can this guy's poor like love interest get murdered?
He should probably move out of that neighborhood at some point. You know? I mean, too many people are walking home with their groceries and then getting killed. I mean, I would probably move, you know? This is not a batteries not included type of a movie. But there's just so many different ones. I mean, come on. They even, you know, during this period too, which you have in the book is the Hercules ones. And those Hercules movies were like freaking awesome looking. I mean, the way that they did the stop motion. Now, there's a lot of graphics that weren't too great, but they were so cool. You know, to see him fighting electronic things or metal stuff and flying through space after he threw a brick, you know, it's just weird shit, you know? I mean, but it's just so cool. It's so entertaining because they really bring in this sense of wonderment that you had at the very beginning in the golden age of movies, you know? It didn't matter what it looked like.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it just was there. It was great, you know. And getting and like you were saying about the people that were in these, how many of these people do you think really thought that this would be something that lasted? They're like, no, this is a job. I'm going to do it. It's going to be fun. But then now they're talking about it 40 years later about their time on set, you know.
Yeah.
There's people that are like, oh man, what was it like doing this and how was this? I think it's really cool that something like this as maniacal and fast as it actually went, actually has lasted longer than a lot of other things, especially in movies.
Yeah, it's amazing. And you wonder, these people think these movies came out and some of them had maybe a budget of $5 million and they make $1 million in the U.S. theaters. And they assume that it played for a weekend. Nobody's ever going to see this. And now, as you said, 40 years later, people are bringing it up to them. So these had second lives, whether it was in the video store or on cable showings.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the action stars of those years, you know, you still recognize them from those movies like that, like Van Damme, you know? Of course. I mean, because Jean-Claude Van Damme starting off in a Cannon movie, you know, that was kind of a remnant of another Cannon movie that almost didn't get finished. And then you kind of have those kind of balancing each other, and it creates this whole weird futuristic... I don't even know how to really describe Cyborg, you know? I mean, it's just so crazy. And everybody in that movie was awesome. And I mean, a lot of these people weren't great actors. A lot of people were phoning it in, you know? But at the same time, they were doing what they loved.
Maybe they weren't phoning in. Maybe they were just doing their best, Brock.
Oh, maybe. Well, I mean, think about it. Like, think about Bronson. I bet you he was just like, after 3, he was like, ugh.
Well, I'm sure, yeah. I mean, that's definitely the one you could probably pull for phoning it in after a certain point, I'm sure.
Yeah. It's like, well, I guess I'll afford my beer money next week or something. Something, because I don't know what he did. He probably hung out with Charlton Heston, for all I know. Maybe not. But there's just so many different genres in this stuff and of course they started with the TNA stuff, you know, and I think one of his very first big movies that he did in Israel was all about like prepubescent, like, you know, kids trying to lose their virginity and everything.
Yeah. Yeah, the Lemon Popsicle series.
Yeah, and then they remade it for this. And what I did notice a lot about these movies is the directors and the writers and the musicians that were involved with this. They were really putting a lot. The production people were the glue that held everything together because they were really doing great stuff with that. This was their proving ground, you know. They could bounce from this. But then you got Tobe Hooper, which Tobe Hooper was already like completely badass. But then they're like, hey, go ahead and do Invaders from Mars. And Invaders from Mars is such a crazy movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Hooper was fresh off Poltergeist, which he was really a hot name, and they pulled him in for a 3-movie contract. Life Force, Invaders from Mars, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Which, very divisive.
Well, we did Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 on one of our podcasts a long time ago as part of our Dropping Deuces series. But we all like love that movie. We absolutely love that movie because it's just so bad. Don't you, Dan?
Sorry, we almost had a break in.
Oh.
So if you could repeat the question, I apologize.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2.
Dude, that's my favorite horror movie, whatever that movie is, not really horror movie of all time. It's means more than it should to me. Let's just put it that way.
Well, I mean, Dustin Hoffman? Or not Dustin Hoffman. What the
Dennis
fuck?
Hopper?
Yeah, Dennis Hopper. It starts with a D. Whoops. But it's such a fucking crazy movie. And I mean, it's just all over the place. And it was funny. It was just, I don't know. It was one of those movies that'll always stick with you. And the look of that one, I love the way that the colors look. I love how dark it is. I love how, you know, it just, it fires on all cylinders for me. It really is one of those movies that I'll always watch.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, I love that movie, but the people who didn't love it were the Menachem and Yoram. The whole time they expected to get a straight horror movie, something more along the lines, and Toby came back with this black comedy, and they were pretty horrified. But it became a cult classic, and it did. I mean, it definitely has its fans. It's gone on to that second life, but. Yeah, at the time, those guys were not happy. If you look at some of the early trailers, if you look at some of the early trailers for that one, because they were pieced together with just like some lights and a chainsaw by the people back at Canon, because Toby was too busy shooting Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, and it definitely advertises a very different product than what we got.
Sure.
yeah. Especially with like what was his line? The working man always getting it in the ass. What?
There's so many great one-liners from that movie. Makes me so happy.
Well, I mean, like Breakin' and Breakin' 2, those are literally like in the lexicon of anybody's movies because they watched those movies and they're so entertaining in the way that I'm not a break dancer. Like, I'm not going to go out and start popping and locking and stuff. Well, you know, I did win that contest last week. But but it was just so cool to see something like that. It was just so funny and comical. But those guys were like going at it, and they were geniuses at dancing, you know, and they just brought that out, you know. And even my grandfather name is Shabadoo.
I will say it gave us the greatest tagline for a sequel ever. Because now everything that's a 2 in my whole entire life has been the Electric Boogaloo. So
that's just so cool. I mean, it just the colors of that one too. I mean, part 2 was just like, God, that was slap bracelet in your face. You know what I mean? It was just
more
bright.
Fluorescent clothing in that movie than I think ever been fitted to film.
That was the thing that was just
minus
like,
maybe Batman and Robin. Oh
no, that wasn't fluorescent. That was just like
lights. Yeah, fluorescent lights. My bad.
It was crap.
We're not going to get on that subject. No. This is so. I think that one of the things that I found also is that this guy had great mentors.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about Corman. He's working with Coppola, or not working with, but working under Corman with Coppola.
So yeah, Menachem came from that Corman tree. He only worked on one film, but it was The Young Racers, which was the same set that had Menachem Golan, it had Francis Ford Coppola, and it had Robert Towne.
Yeah.
And just think of all of the movies that those three names have been responsible for, that they all happen to be on this one racing B movie that Corman made and got their starts there. That was, I believe, the first film all of them worked on.
What I found amazing with that too, and again, I don't want to give too much of your book away, Austin, because I really enjoyed it. But how the world could have been very much different had the funding not gone to Coppola, right. And we wouldn't have gotten Dementia 13. I mean, and that's really, I mean, that's kind of what launched him, you know?
Right. That was, so Corman had money left over from this production that was there, needed to be spent, and he was going to give it to one of these guys to make their own film. And originally it had been Menachem who had come to him with this Hebrew script to make a black and white movie, and Corman had said, great, let's do it. And then as the story that Menachem would tell later on, I had to take it with a grain of salt, but that Coppola had come back with the idea for Dementia 13 and told Corman, you're crazy, like you're going to spend this money on a Hebrew film, nobody's going to see that, like I can make you this and that you can sell it to drive-ins and all these other places. And the money shifted. It went to Coppola, who used some of the same crew from Young Racers and that leftover money to make his first movie.
Amazing.
So,
amazing.
And Menachem got, he just, picked himself up off the ground and went back to Israel and started making his own movies and doing it independently. Like really,
he was so dedicated to his craft. That was another thing that I really got out of it is, and we're not going to get too far into that. Again, people have to buy this book, Austin. we want to make you money.
I appreciate that. So, everybody.
Absolutely. Everybody listening, buy this book.
Yes.
We will, and we'll get into that in a minute, but we do got to get kind of close to wrapping up here. So I'm going to leave you, let's do a real quick question with you. So again, keeping it to this book, what's your favorite canon film from this book?
From this book, I have a very soft spot for Revenge of the Ninja, the second of their first Ninja trilogy, because it hits a sweet spot between being a just really badass action ninja film. You've got some great fights, you've got some amazing stunt work, you've got the demon ninja and his crazy silver mask and all these very memorable things, but it's also incredibly silly. The plot that these people are smuggling drugs inside of porcelain dolls and into Japan. The villains are dressed up like Shokasugi fights a gang of bad guys that are dressed up basically like the village people. You have a cowboy, an Indian, a cop, all on a kid's playground. It's not afraid to be silly, but it balances it right, because a lot of canon movies, they're either goofy and you enjoy them because they're goofy, or they're action-packed and you enjoy them because they're badass. And that's a movie that just it's the perfect balance between the two for me. And all three of those ninja movies, Enter the Ninja, Revenge of the Ninja, and Ninja 3: The Domination, are incredible in their own way. But that hits the perfect balance for me.
I love that. That's a great answer. And I was happy to know that other people fought against the idea that was a trilogy as well. I never understood it when I was a kid. I'm like, they don't go together. I was really confused. My friends are like, no, let's get the whole trilogy. I'm like, no, it's not a trilogy. It's just a bunch of movies.
But you have Shokasugi in 3 different roles. It's the most unrelated trilogy of films that I think has been put together.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate your time, Austin. I appreciate you coming on. I've really enjoyed our time together. My hope is that you will come back when the second book's ready to be released.
I would love to, and thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
But then also, you got to come back for a very special Drop Culture podcast on my favorite one out of all of them, Cobra. Ooh. We got to do Cobra. I mean, Cobra is one of the most badass movies that I've ever seen in my entire life. I love every bit of it, and it's so horrible, but it is so great.
Absolutely.
You got to do it, because we even did one that if we were going to do a prequel sequel type of a deal, and I that was one of my ideas, was to do a prequel to Cobra, all about that, like a TV show about it. Yeah. I had everything picked out, but
maybe gonna happen.
I know.
Now. So
he's pulling everything out from his greatest hits.
Yeah. And Cobra is one of the best, and you got to come back for that whenever we get to it, because we got like 30 movies to do.
That sounds like a lot of fun to me. Definitely keep me posted.
Will do. Hey, before we start wrapping up, I want you, if you can give out some stuff you want to shout out. Obviously, links to the book, links to you, please.
Yeah, absolutely. The book is available from either straight from the publisher, bearmanormedia.com, or through Amazon. Amazon's really the quickest way to get it right now, with how slowly things are shipping and heading through the mail. But yeah, I'm on social media, facebook.com/Canon Film Guide. I've been on there for a little over a year and sharing. There's just so many things that didn't make this book, and piles of lobby cards and deleted scenes and things like that there's just not room to put in a print volume. And so I've been describing the Facebook page as the bonus features, the extra material for this book. And I'm on Twitter. I just joined Twitter, so I'm not very good at it yet, but it's at Canon Film Guide.
I saw that this morning, actually. I was like, wow. Brock runs our Facebook, and I run our Twitter. I don't do it very well either, so don't worry about it.
This stuff's hard.
It's very different than what I'm used to.
Let me ask you a real quick question too.
Sure.
This one, basically, how did you get the rights to be able to put the movie posters into the book as well?
Well, a lot of that is fair use. These things were released as promotional materials, publicity materials. So anything that really goes out in that way is fair game. A lot of movie stills I would have had trouble putting in there.
Yeah.
Because that wasn't really specifically as, here, this is for the public, do what you will to promote the movie. A lot of those are actually everything in the book, except for where there's a few captions where it's noted, film, like photos that directors or stuntmen provided to me are all stuff from my collection that I had to scan. I've got bankers boxes and rolls of posters that I've acquired over the years, and
that was going to lead me into my next question: is have you ever thought about doing a, like, maybe Art of Canon Films kind of a compendium to everything that you have right there, all of your extra paperwork and things like that you might have? Have you ever thought about putting that into like some sort of a visual book, a visual guide as well?
I would love to. If I knew a publisher that was willing to do a color book, I've got this stuff that, I've got probably 10 different 10 to Midnight posters from various phases of when they were selling it in different countries. And yeah, I would love to do something like that. Just, there are so many things I acquired that, again, couldn't fit into this book. And the book's 6x9 trim, so the images aren't that large, but these are posters that I have some Death Wish 3 posters that are the 2-sheet billboard posters that are, like, I think 9x6. Some of the old Subway posters for missing in action movies. So stuff that I would love to, do something visual and in color.
It'd be the ultimate coffee table book right there. That would be cool.
Because movie posters and music posters, that's my passion. That's what I love to do. I love to make them and everything like that. If you ever got to where you would want to really kind of pursue that after this is done, I would definitely be on board trying to help you out with anything graphic design wise, you know what I mean? Like helping you put it together. That's one thing that I've learned over the years. And that's what to me personally, something like that, to have a piece of that history. And I've seen some books like that. And I think really to kind of wrap everything up for you, that would be awesome, to have that just right behind it. And this is all we have. And it's just nothing but captions, leading back to your other book too. I think it would be awesome.
I would love to do something like that. And I've been holding on to all of these things, and they've been stacking up in, like I said, the banker's boxes back in my closet and on shelves in various rooms.
Yeah. If you ever want to pursue something like that, I'm your man. I would definitely love to be able to do it. That would be so awesome. Just to be able to look at those things. That's what like I said, that's my passion. That's what I love to look at, and I love the imagery that a lot of these have. I think it's something that is forgotten when it comes to movies is the movie poster, because we get the same movie poster for every single Avengers movie and every single everything, and they all have the nice bright lights and everything like that, but literally like something like this to you where you could see how they would sell it, how they could push things to it, and I think it would be really cool.
Yeah, these were works of art. They really were painted, and they had some real talent, from Drew Struzan to just the people that had to do the Spanish and Italian posters, simply because back then you couldn't have the title. The titles were painted onto them or cut and pasted onto it, so they would have to hire somebody to paint an all new poster in Germany just so they could put on the different title. And
now it's become no go ahead.
You can tell too when people had to make posters for these movies and had to paint them and hadn't seen the movie yet, and those are some of my favorites, because you get The Last American Virgin in so many different countries, and only the U.S. poster art looks like the cast. The rest of it is just teens. Some are set in the 1950s. It would be a lot of fun to hold these up and have a place where you could see them all.
Hi.
My daughter is stepping in.
Oh, nice to meet you. No, that that's just something I love to look at. And I think that history is something that's lost too, because so many people put so much time and effort. Just every little aspect of these movies needs to be preserved in some sort of a way, just to really kind of inspire more people, I think, to really kind of jump and go to the next level and maybe try something else. Because right now you have all these poster companies that are redoing old movie posters and redoing different things like that. And that would be something else, to look at too, I just really think having those out there, and then whenever they have these new releases and these other different things like that would be awesome,
Yeah. One of my dreams when this whole pandemic is hopefully run its course, I would love to do screenings just afterwards. I don't with a book reading, nobody wants to listen to me just read from the book. You want to see the movie.
Sure.
And I would love to, whether it's at breweries or, at the remaining movie theaters that aren't the big giant movie houses, do a series of screenings and talk about them afterwards. But the fun thing is I would hope to bring along these posters. We could put these posters up in the lobby, set up the lobby cards, and
that would be pretty awesome. There's a lot of places around here. At least I know about three places that do play movies just on a projector at breweries, and like you said, things like that, which is just very, very cool, because there's people out there that want to see these. You can't find them on film, and if you do, are you going to find a projector for them? So you have them digitally, and then you're able to play them all in a row. I mean, I just think it's really cool. Like the New Beverly, they always have what you're talking about right there. I think that is something that's missing out there, is the lore and these movies coming out there and these people talking about them and enjoying them. 40, almost 50 years later.
Well, I think you're really onto something there, Austin, as far as like a promotional tour, to be able to speak a little bit, and maybe even ask some questions, maybe a couple passages, but then be able to really dive into the movie, and then maybe have some discussion afterwards. And I think that we're at a point now where there is a lot of individual and small time investment into some of these older theaters. Man, you could almost do a national tour. You could make it happen.
Yeah, that would be a dream. It would be take some Canon movies on the road.
Oh man, that would be awesome, wouldn't it? That would just like if you took the Ninja series and it just did a Ninja roadshow, that would just be so cool. I know there would be a lot of people that are like, oh, maybe, that would be really cool to go see. Let's go watch those, because I know there's a lot more people like us out there that just need that voice, and need to come out and just be like, I didn't care if it was bad. I loved it. It's all that matters.
And these are the movies that I think so many of them are served by having other people in the room with you watching them. I've been fortunate. There's a lot of the first times I'll watch something to write about it, my wife will sit down. When I was still living in New York, and you could have friends over, or you could have people over to see it with you, and that was a lot of fun. But when I'm watching it for the second, third, fourth time, writing about the book, it's a much lonelier experience. It's sitting in a dark basement by myself and taking notes. But yeah, these are movies that you need people with you to see them.
Yeah, we resemble that remark.
Yeah, that's me. I'm the little troll sitting by my wife while she's sleeping. Watching something like one of these. I'm watching Invaders from Mars at like 2:00 in the morning. Like, oh man, this is so awesome.
Yeah, my wife will work. She's working from home right now, but she'll be working at night, and I'll be watching. The other night, I'm watching America 3000, and she'll be paying just enough attention for every 15 minutes to ask a question, but that's because she missed 10 minutes worth of plot because she's answering emails. But it's still it's fun to have her there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, maybe in the future we could also talk about doing one of those live streaming events for a Canon film.
Yeah.
We could maybe make that happen. Have you done one of those yet?
I just recorded a fan commentary with a podcast, and it was a lot of fun. We did Breakin' 2.
Awesome.
Nice.
And it was just a lot of fun because we queued up the movie at the same time, and we just sort of talked when people were dancing.
Absolutely.
There's not much plot to miss in any of these.
No, this is a lot of breakdancing.
Right.
Come on, Shabba-Doo.
Yeah, I would love to.
Yeah. No, that would be awesome. Yeah. We're going to have to get on that video train one of these days. I mean, honestly. Yeah, I know. Since we're squares and we have our normal jobs to do, which fucking take forever. If my life would be great if I didn't have my job.
Said every person ever.
If I didn't need insurance, I wouldn't be there. But no, it was great having you, man. It was awesome, and it's nice to share a conversation with a kindred spirit. Anywhere, but you're all the way across the country, pretty much, which is awesome to know that we're all out there.
Yeah, we're everywhere, hidden in little corners.
Find us. Wishing we had our own video store. Yeah, video and record store, just to sit around and watch movies all day.
There you go.
And be like, why are you renting this one? You need to get this one.
Yeah.
Giving that education, letting 12-year-olds rent Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Maybe not for that.
No, but I really appreciate you being on the show, man.
Absolutely.
That was really awesome.
This has been a blast.
Cool. Well, Dan, you want to wrap it up?
Sure. So again, check out the Canon Film Guide from Austin Trunick. Perfect.
That's correct.
I always screw up the last name, so I like to get that confirmation. Appreciate it. For all you guys listening, definitely check out his book. Check out our website, www.dropculture.com. You can go to our friends of the show. We'll have a link to his social media and also to his
Amazon,
the Amazon book,
everything like that. Yeah.
So we'll have all that on our website as well. Hit us up on the socials at Drop Culture on Twitter, Facebook.com/Drop Culture Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. What else? What else do you want
just
to do?
go to Google and Drop Culture's on there.
Just Google it. Figure it out yourself.
Google
kids.
it.
Austin, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. This has been fantastic.
Awesome.
Peace.
This is the second test of us making a record here. We're gonna do it right. Wow. Like a cougar in the night.